Welcome back to the deep dive. We're really thrilled you're sitting down with us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We've got a lot to get through.
We really do. So I was going through the notes and the source materials you shared with us earlier, specifically focusing on the introductory concepts of Chapter 20.
Ah, right. Locomotion and movement.
Exactly. And as I was synthesizing the core definitions there, I had this fundamental shift in perspective.
Oh, really? That's always a good sign.
Yeah, it was a total aha moment. So, okay, let's unpack this. We spend our whole lives using the words movement and locomotion, just, completely interchangeably.
Right, like they mean the exact same thing.
Right. If I wave my hand, I moved. If I walk across the room, I moved. But the material we're analyzing today draws a hard, completely non-negotiable line between those two concepts.
It does. It absolutely does.
They are distinct biological phenomena, and understanding the gap between them, it actually changes how you view living organisms entirely.
It's a critical distinction, and it really forms the entire foundation of the chapter. For anyone listening, especially those of you preparing for the Neet exams, where precise terminology is just, well, it's everything this introductory material is deceptive.
Yeah, it feels really basic at first glance.
Exactly. It looks simple on the surface, but it's doing some serious heavy lifting. I mean, I've spent over 15 years analyzing these specific biological frameworks with students, and I see people rush past this introduction all the time.
Just trying to get to the good stuff, right? The complex mechanics.
Right. They want to get straight to the sliding filament theory or memorizing the skeletal system. But if you don't internalize the philosophical and biological difference between merely moving and actually locomoting, the rest of the biomechanics, they completely lack context.
They're just memorizing floating facts.
Exactly. So we're going to slow down today. We're going to isolate exactly what is happening when a biological entity shifts its mass.
And to really visualize that difference, I was thinking about how to separate the background noise of life from intentional travel.
Oh, I like that phrasing. Background noise.
Yeah. So think of a living organism as a car. Movement is the baseline state of that car just being turned on.
Okay. The engine is running.
Right. The engine is running, the pistons are firing, the belts are rotating. You might even have the windshield wipers swishing back and forth, or the radio antenna vibrating. There is a tremendous amount of kinetic energy happening.
A lot of mechanical shifting.
Exactly. The system is highly active, but the car's still in park. It's just sitting there in your driveway.
Right. It hasn't gone anywhere.
Locomotion, on the other hand, is the specific deliberate act of putting that car into drive, pressing the accelerator, and actually changing your GPS coordinates.
Yeah.
You have physically relocated the entire system from point A to point B.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy perfectly highlights the biological hierarchy. You cannot have the car drive down the street without the internal engine components moving.
Obviously not.
Right. So locomotion is entirely dependent on foundational movement. But you absolutely can have the engine running without the car going anywhere.
Just idling.
Yes. In biological terms, stationary life, like a plant or a sponge or a barnacle, has its engine running constantly. Their internal fluids stream, their cellular machinery churns, their leaves might slowly track the sun across the sky.
They are definitely moving.
They are, but they're permanently parked.
And that stationary existence, that's a massive evolutionary gamble, isn't it? You are entirely at the mercy of your immediate surroundings.
It is a profound vulnerability. If you cannot locomote, you are just waiting for the universe to deliver survival right to your doorstep. You need the water current to push nutrients over your cellular receptors. You need the wind to carry your reproductive material.
And if the wind doesn't blow, you're out of luck.
Exactly. If the local environment shifts, say a resource dries up or a toxin is introduced, a purely stationary organism cannot relocate to save itself. It just dies. This is why the evolution of locomotion was such a massive biological arms race.
It changes the whole game.
It does. Animals developed the capacity to change their coordinates to actively interact with the environment rather than just passively endure it. It's the ultimate proactive survival mechanism.
So our mission for you today is to build a rock-solid mental map of this distinction. We're going to scale up biological movement from a single microscopic cell all the way to complex human anatomy.
We're going to cover a lot of ground.
We really are. We'll explore how nature is incredibly frugal, reusing the exact same anatomical structures for completely different purposes, and we are going to dissect the 6 universal evolutionary drivers that force an animal to expend the massive amount of energy required to locomote.
Because putting that car in drive is metabolically expensive.
Very expensive. And as we navigate this map, we will be looking at this strictly through the lens of exam preparation, right?
Absolutely. We won't be saving the strategic insights for the end. We're going to point out the traps and the high-yield concepts exactly where they appear in the source material. Examiners love this introductory section because it tests your reading comprehension and your logical deduction just as much as it tests your biological knowledge.
Yeah, so let's start building that mental map, starting at the absolute base level. The source material begins by isolating the most fundamental type of movement, bringing us all the way down to the unicellular level with the amoeba.
Right.
And it specifically focuses on the streaming of protoplasm.
The phrasing there is very deliberate. The material explicitly defines the streaming of protoplasm in unicellular organisms like the amoeba as a simple form of movement.
Right, simple form.
Yes. When you picture an amoeba, you are looking at a single, isolated cell. It does not have specialized muscle tissues. It has no skeletal levers, no complex joints. It's essentially a membrane containing living fluid substance, the protoplasm.
So the movement here is just the internal fluid literally shifting, oozing, and flowing within the confines of that cell membrane.
Exactly. It's the rawest physical manifestation of life.
It's basically the biological equivalent of water sloshing inside a water balloon, but, highly directed and organized.
That's a great visual. And this brings up our first major tactical point for the listener. Examiners routinely test this exact phrasing.
The simple form part.
Yes. A very common multiple-choice question will ask you to identify an example of a simple form of movement in biological systems. Students often bypass protoplasm and select cilia or flagella because those structures feel more tangible. They're distinct anatomical features, right?
Right, they look like little hairs or tails. They look like actual tools.
Exactly. So the student's brain gravitates toward them. But you must adhere strictly to the classification provided in the foundational literature. The streaming of protoplasm is the designated simple form. If you see the word simple in relation to movement, your mind needs to immediately anchor to the amoeba and its protoplasm.
That makes total sense, because once you move past just the internal fluid shifting around, you start dealing with actual biological hardware.
Right.
The material moves from that simple baseline to an intermediate level of complexity. It introduces specialized cellular appendages, specifically cilia and flagella. So we're still looking at microscopic or cellular scales, but the mechanics have clearly evolved.
We've transitioned from fluid dynamics to structural engineering. Cilia and flagella are distinct physical extrusions from the cell body. They're built from complex protein arrangements designed specifically to interact with the external environment. They whip, they beat, they create microscopic currents.
It's a massive step up in evolutionary complexity from simply shifting your internal weight.
It really is. And then we scale up again to the complex level, dealing with multicellular appendages. The material highlights tentacles in organisms and then brings it directly to human anatomy, listing limbs, jaws, eyelids, and the tongue.
Just think about the massive range of mechanical diversity in that brief list.
It's wild.
An eyelid fluttering just to clear dust from a cornea. A jaw crushing dense food fibers. A tongue articulating to swallow or produce speech. They are incredibly sophisticated, highly coordinated biological actions.
They are. And they're all just movements.
Right, let's do a quick thought experiment to really isolate what this means for you listening. Imagine a scenario where your body retains all of its capacity for movement, but you instantly lose all capacity for locomotion.
Okay, a localized paralysis situation.
Yeah, you're sitting wherever you are right now. You can blink, you can speak, you can chew, your heart is pumping, your lungs are expanding. You are exhibiting a massive, complex symphony of biological movements.
But you're rooted to the floor.
Exactly. If a fire breaks out in the room, you can turn your head to look at it, you can scream for help, but you cannot displace your body. You cannot change your coordinates to escape the heat.
It's a terrifying scenario, honestly. But it flawlessly illustrates the limitation of movement in a vacuum. A living being can exhibit an astonishingly wide range of movements that result in absolutely zero change of physical location. The jaw articulates, but the body remains stationary.
And this is the conceptual threshold we have to cross today.
Which brings us to the definitive criteria, the golden rule of locomotion. The material establishes two mandatory non-negotiable requirements for a movement to be classified as locomotion. First, the movement must result in a change of place or location. Your geographic coordinates must be different at the end of the action.
Right, point A to point B.
And the second requirement is equally critical. The movement must be voluntary. It must be a self-directed, intentional action initiated by the organism itself.
So it can't be an accident.
Right. If you are standing on a riverbank and a flash flood sweeps you 2 miles downstream, your location has drastically changed. Your coordinates are totally different. But you did not locomote. You were passively transported by environmental kinetics. Locomotion requires the organism to actively generate the force required for displacement.
So when we look at the specific examples provided in the text, walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming, they all perfectly fit those two criteria. They are self-directed, and they result in a change of location.
What's fascinating here is how nature groups wildly divergent biomechanical processes under a single conceptual umbrella.
How do you mean?
We'll look at a bird in flight. It is actively fighting gravity. It's manipulating air currents with hollow bones and specialized feather structures, expending massive amounts of aerobic energy just to stay aloft.
Right.
Now contrast that with a fish swimming. The fish is suspended in a dense, buoyant medium. It's using muscular undulations to propel itself against water resistance. Mechanically, physically, chemically, flying and swimming have very little in common.
Almost nothing.
But biologically, they are identical expressions of the same intent. Voluntary displacement.
They're just different biological solutions to the exact same problem of needing to be somewhere else.
Precisely. And understanding that intent is crucial for navigating the material. Now, logically, if locomotion is this highly specialized voluntary upgrade from basic movement, you might assume that an organism would possess two completely separate sets of tools, right?
Yeah, that would be the intuitive assumption. One set of anatomical structures dedicated solely to stationary movement, and a completely different set of structures reserved exclusively for locomotion. You have your eating tools and you have your walking tools.
Right. But here is where we hit a major realization in the source material. Nature does not operate like a cleanly divided toolbox.
It's a messy toolbox.
Very messy. The material explicitly states that locomotory structures need not be different from those affecting other types of movements. Nature is the ultimate minimalist. It conserves energy and genetic coding wherever possible. If an existing structure can be slightly modified or simply utilized in a different pattern to achieve a new result, biological systems will absolutely exploit that efficiency.
This concept of dual-purpose anatomy, it was a huge whoa moment for me. And it's heavily emphasized in the text, which means it's a prime area for examiners to test your conceptual depth.
Oh, they love testing this.
The material provides 3 distinct case studies to prove this point, and we really need to dissect the mechanics of each one. So let's look at the first case study, the Paramecium.
Right. The material specifically points out that the Paramecium uses its cilia for 2 entirely different functions. First, it uses them to aid in the movement of food through the cytopharynx.
So we need to visualize this to really understand the efficiency. The Paramecium is a single-celled organism, and it's covered in thousands of these tiny, hair-like projections called cilia. When the Paramecium is feeding, it is generally stationary.
It's just sitting there.
Right. It coordinates the beating of these cilia in a very specific rhythmic wave. This wave creates a localized microcurrent in the surrounding water, acting like a microscopic conveyor belt that sweeps bacteria and food particles directly into its cellular mouth, the cytopharynx.
And this is a highly coordinated movement. The cilia are rapidly shifting, the food is moving, but the Paramecium itself is not changing its geographic coordinates.
It's eating, not traveling. But then the situation changes. Let's say the local food supply is totally exhausted, or maybe the water becomes too acidic. The Paramecium needs to leave. Right. But it doesn't sprout a new set of microscopic legs. It takes those exact same cilia, the ones it just used as a conveyor belt, and changes their beating pattern. Instead of creating a localized current to sweep food inwards, it uses the cilia like thousands of tiny oars to propel its entire body through the water.
It uses its feeding mechanism as its transport mechanism.
It's brilliant.
It is. And this brings up a massive high-yield warning for the listener. When discussing the Paramecium, examiners will not just test whether you know it uses cilia.
That's too easy.
Way too easy. That's surface-level knowledge. They will test your precise retention of the vocabulary related to its dual function. A very common question format will ask. In Paramecium, cilia assist in locomotion and the movement of food through the well. And the options might include the oral groove, the gullet, the cytostome, and the cytopharynx.
And all of those sound biologically plausible if you're just guessing.
They really do, which is why defensive reading is so critical. You must lock in the exact term used in the source material, cytopharynx. The examiner is testing whether you actually understand the structural pathway highlighted in the text, or if you just skimmed the word cilia and moved on. The dual function is locomotion and sweeping food into the cytopharynx.
Okay, got it. Cytopharynx is the keyword anchor there. So moving to the second case study, the material looks at the Hydra. This is a multicellular organism, so we're stepping up the complexity. It highlights the Hydra's use of tentacles.
The Hydra is a fascinating organism for this exact reason. It's a predatory freshwater polyp. For a large portion of its life, it attaches its base to a rock or a submerged leaf. It extends its long tentacles into the water column and just waits.
Like a trap.
Exactly. When a smaller organism, like a water flea, brushes against a tentacle, the Hydra reacts with a violent, rapid movement. The tentacles contract, stinging cells fire, and the prey is physically dragged down into the Hydra's mouth. This is an aggressive, highly energy-intensive movement.
But the Hydra hasn't moved from its rock.
Right. It's using the tentacles purely as weapons and feeding limbs. But again, what happens when the Hydra needs to relocate? Perhaps the water temperature changes, or the prey in that specific area is depleted.
It has to move.
It has to move, so it detaches its base,
Effort.
it bends its entire body over, and uses those exact same hunting tentacles to grip the substrate. It then flips its base over in a somersaulting motion, reattaches, and stands back up. It has physically changed its coordinates. It is locomoted.
And the primary structures it used to execute that change of location were the exact same structures it uses to paralyze and consume its prey.
It is taking its arms and using them as legs. It is the perfect demonstration of the material's claim that locomotory structures do not need to be distinct from movement structures.
Yeah, it's just incredible. And the material brings this concept all the way up the evolutionary ladder to human anatomy for the third case study. It points out that humans use limbs for changes in body postures and for locomotion as well.
Think about the biomechanics of your own body. If you are sitting at a desk and you shift your weight, crossing one leg over the other to relieve pressure on your lower back, you are engaging massive muscle groups.
Your quadriceps, your hamstrings, your glutes are all firing to articulate your joints and change your posture. You are executing a highly complex series of movements, but you are still sitting in the exact same chair.
The physical structures, the femur, the tibia, the muscle fibers, they are fully engaged in movement. But there is no displacement. However, the moment you decide to stand up and walk to a different room, you utilize the exact same skeletal levers and muscle groups to push against the floor, fight gravity, and propel your mass forward.
The postural tools instantly transition into locomotory tools.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have these three distinct biological proofs. The Paramecium cilia, the Hydra's tentacles, and human limbs. All of them demonstrate that a single structure handles both stationary movement and active locomotion.
Right.
The material then takes these observations and synthesizes them into a definitive logical rule. This is the philosophical core of the entire introduction. It states, all locomotions are movements, but all movements are not locomotions.
This sentence is a logical absolute. It is a Venn diagram perfectly translated into text, and you must be able to visualize it instantly. Imagine a massive circle drawn on a whiteboard. Let's label this giant circle movement. Everything we have discussed today exists somewhere inside this circle.
The streaming protoplasm, the beating heart, the fluttering eyelid, the Hydra grabbing prey, the Paramecium sweeping food.
If it involves biological kinetic energy, it lives inside this giant circle.
Now, inside that massive movement circle, we draw a much smaller, specialized circle. We label this smaller circle locomotion. This inner circle contains only the actions that are voluntary and result in a change of place. Walking, flying, swimming, somersaulting to a new rock.
Because that smaller locomotion circle is contained entirely within the larger movement circle, the first half of the rule is mathematically true. All locomotions are movements.
Because it's biologically impossible to change your physical location without your internal structure shifting.
You cannot walk without moving your legs. You cannot fly without moving your wings.
Yeah.
Therefore, anytime you are engaging in locomotion, you are by definition engaging in movement.
But the second half of the rule is where the boundary is drawn. All movements are not locomotions. If you throw a dart randomly into that giant movement circle, you might hit the locomotion zone, but you are far more likely to hit the massive area outside of it.
You might hit chewing.
Right. Chewing is inside the movement circle, but it is outside the locomotion circle. It does not change your coordinates.
This logical structure is one of the most frequently tested concepts in this chapter. Examiners love to test your ability to read carefully under pressure. We call this the all versus some trap. In a multiple-choice scenario, asking you to identify the incorrect statement, they will subtly invert the logic. They will write, all movements are locomotions.
And if you're stressed, rushing through a paper, your brain sees the words movement and locomotion linked together, remembers they're related, and just assumes the statement is correct.
It sounds biologically plausible if you aren't actively defending against the trap. You must train your brain to stop the moment you see the word all preceding movements.
Yeah.
You visualize the Venn diagram. Is every movement a locomotion? No. Blinking is a movement, but it is not locomotion. The statement is definitively false. The golden rule only flows in one direction. Locomotion is a subset of movement.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's not enough to just memorize the sentence. You have to understand the boundaries of the logic. Okay, so we've established the definitions. We know what movement is, we know what locomotion is, and we know how nature economically builds the anatomical tools for both. This leads us to the most complex part of our analysis today, the biological drivers, the why of the wander.
We've established that locomotion is a voluntary upgrade, but it is an incredibly expensive upgrade. Moving a biological mass against gravity, water resistance, or friction requires a massive expenditure of metabolic energy.
It burns ATP like crazy.
Exactly. It burns ATP, it requires continuous caloric intake, and it exposes the organism to external risks. An animal does not locomote casually. There must be a biological return on investment.
And the source material addresses this directly. It states that the methods of locomotion performed by animals vary with their habitats and the demand of the situation. Those are the two governing variables of travel: habitat and demand.
Habitat dictates the physical mechanics of the locomotion. The environment sets the physical rules. If your habitat is a dense forest canopy, your locomotion might involve brachiation, swinging from branch to branch. If your habitat is a pelagic zone of the ocean, your locomotion requires hydrodynamic streamlining and fin articulation. You cannot utilize a method of locomotion that your habitat does not physically support.
So the habitat answers the how, but the demand of the situation answers the why. Why is the animal spending the energy to move right now?
And the material doesn't leave this open to interpretation. It provides a highly specific list of 6 core evolutionary motivators that drive locomotion. These are the fundamental pressures of survival. Let's deep dive into each of these 6 demands because they represent the entire biological narrative of life on Earth.
I'm ready. The first motivator listed is the most constant, relentless pressure in biology: the search for food. Every heterotrophic organism, meaning organisms that can't synthesize their own energy from sunlight like plants do, is trapped in a continuous metabolic countdown. Your internal engine is always running, which means you are constantly burning fuel.
If a stationary organism, say a highly localized fungus, exhausts all the nutrients in its immediate square foot of soil, it dies. It has no mechanism to access new resources.
But an animal utilizes locomotion to solve the depletion problem.
Right. And the search for food drives a massive variety of locomotory strategies. Think of a grazing herbivore like a zebra. Its food source, grass, is relatively low in nutritional density. Therefore, the zebra must constantly locomote, moving from patch to patch, grazing continually just to meet its baseline caloric needs. Its locomotion is a slow, continuous pursuit of fuel.
Now contrast that with an apex predator like a cheetah. The cheetah's food source is highly concentrated protein, but that food source actively locomotes away from it.
So the cheetah has to invest an explosive, massive amount of energy into high-speed locomotion for a short duration to secure a massive caloric return. Both the zebra and the cheetah are locomoting in search of food, but the specific demand of their dietary niche dictates entirely different biomechanical strategies.
Okay, the second motivator is the search for shelter. This is the drive for physical homeostasis. The environment is rarely neutral. It's usually trying to kill you. Temperatures fluctuate, precipitation changes, solar radiation intensifies.
Locomotion allows an animal to actively manipulate its exposure to these elements. If you are a cold-blooded reptile baking on a rock, and your internal body temperature approaches a lethal threshold, you cannot sweat to cool down. Your only survival mechanism is to locomote. You must physically move your body under the shade of a bush or into a burrow.
You are using locomotion to find a microclimate where the environmental pressures are survivable. It could be a hermit crab expending energy to drag itself across the ocean floor to find a slightly larger shell to protect its soft abdomen, or a herd of elk moving into a dense stand of pine trees to block the freezing wind. The demand is protection, and locomotion is the tool to acquire it.
The third driver listed is to find a mate. This shifts the focus from the survival of the individual to the survival of the genetic lineage. You could be perfectly successful at finding food and securing shelter. You'd live a long, healthy life in a single, isolated valley. But biologically, if you do not pass on your genetic material, your evolutionary branch ends.
The drive to reproduce is so powerful that animals will engage in locomotory behaviors that actively jeopardize their immediate individual survival.
Consider the salmon. It spends years in the ocean feeding and growing. But when the reproductive drive hits, it utilizes locomotion to navigate thousands of miles back to the exact freshwater stream where it was born, swimming upstream against raging currents, leaping up waterfalls, and exposing itself to predators like bears.
It expends nearly every ounce of its stored energy on this locomotory journey, often dying shortly after mating. The demand to secure a mate overrides the demand for basic caloric survival.
That is a profound commitment to the genetic future. And that leads directly into the fourth motivator provided in the text, suitable breeding grounds. It is important to note that this is listed as distinct from simply finding a mate.
It's a critical distinction. Finding a mate accomplishes the act of fertilization, but finding suitable breeding grounds ensures the subsequent survival of the vulnerable offspring. An environment that is perfectly fine for an adult animal might be instantly lethal to a newborn or an egg.
Sea turtles are the classic example here. An adult sea turtle is an incredibly robust marine animal. It spends its life navigating the open ocean. It mates in the water. But the open ocean is an impossible environment for a developing embryo. An egg cannot survive underwater.
So, the female turtle must engage in a highly specialized, exhausting form of locomotion. She must drag her massive, aquatic-adapted body out of the water, up a sandy beach, dig a nest, deposit the eggs, and drag herself back to the ocean. She is temporarily shifting her habitat entirely, utilizing locomotion solely to secure a specific, survivable microenvironment for the next generation.
The fifth motivator is the search for favorable climatic conditions. We touched on microclimates with shelter, but this demand relates to massive macro-environmental shifts. This is the biological foundation of migration.
Right, when the Earth tilts and seasonal changes alter entire continents, a habitat that was rich with food and perfectly temperate in the summer becomes a frozen, barren wasteland in the winter.
An animal facing a harsh winter has a few choices. It can adapt its internal physiology, perhaps through hibernation, which is a massive slowing down of the internal movement engine, or it can use locomotion to escape the climate entirely. Millions of birds fly from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere every autumn. They're not chasing a specific prey animal, and they are not seeking a specific mate. They are fleeing the climate itself. They use sustained long-distance locomotion to maintain themselves in a perpetual zone of favorable conditions.
And finally, we arrive at the sixth driver, to escape from enemies or predators. If the search for food is a continuous, slow-burn demand, escaping a predator is the most acute, immediate, high-stakes demand possible. It is the raw fight-or-flight response.
When a predator attacks, all long-term biological goals are instantly suspended. The need for food, shelter, or mate becomes irrelevant if you're about to be consumed. The organism must instantly mobilize every available reserve of ATP and direct it entirely toward rapid, evasive locomotion.
This is the gazelle utilizing explosive speed and erratic changes in direction to evade a lion. It is a biological emergency response. And here is where it gets really interesting to me. We just discussed these demands using examples of zebras, sea turtles, and migrating birds, but these precise motivators apply across the entire spectrum of life. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, to our single-celled amoeba.
The scale shifts, but the fundamental logic remains absolute.
Exactly. If you put a drop of a highly toxic chemical, essentially an environmental enemy, near that amoeba, it will sense the hostile gradient. It will use its streaming protoplasm to slowly, methodically ooze away from the toxin. It is utilizing locomotion to escape an immediate threat. If the fluid it lives in begins to dry up, it will move toward moisture, seeking favorable climatic conditions. The mechanics are microscopic, but the evolutionary intent is identical to a herd of wildebeest fleeing a drought. The biological why is universal.
It's a perfect unifying principle. Now, having unpacked the profound biological logic behind these concepts, I want to pivot back to the tactical reality of the exam. We've touched on several specific traps, but we need to synthesize how an examiner approaches this entire section.
Let's do it. When you're sitting down with a student analyzing a mock paper, what are the overarching structural traps they fall into regarding this specific introductory material?
The most common failure point is treating this introduction as mere background reading. Students assume the real biology starts with the skeletal system or the sliding filament theory. Examiners know this. They exploit this tendency to skim. We discuss the all versus some trap regarding the Venn diagram of movement and locomotion. We discuss the vocabulary trap of the cytopharynx and the paramecium. We discuss the simple form trap requiring the specific answer of protoplasmic streaming.
What about questions that try to separate the structures themselves, the dual-purpose anatomy concept?
That is the area where examiners use assertion and reason questions most effectively. They will present an assertion like, locomotory structures are inherently distinct from movement structures in complex organisms to maximize efficiency. This sounds incredibly logical. It sounds like a high-level evolutionary principle. A student rushing through the paper might think, yes, specialization equals efficiency, that must be true.
But the source material explicitly refutes that logic.
Exactly. The material states, locomotory structures need not be different from those affecting other types of movements. That phrase, need not, is your anchor. It means there is no biological law requiring separation. And when you recognize that assertion is false, you must instantly summon your evidentiary proofs. The Hydra's tentacles capture prey, perform somersaults. The Paramecium's cilia sweep food into the cytopharynx and row through the water. Human limbs shift posture and walk across a room. You use the exact text to dismantle the false logic of the question.
It fundamentally changes how you approach the material. You're not just trying to absorb facts. You are reading defensively. You are constantly asking yourself, how could an examiner twist this sentence to make it sound plausible but factually incorrect?
Defensive reading is the hallmark of a top-tier student. You anticipate the trap before you even see the question options. You read the definition of locomotion and instantly note that it must be voluntary. So when an option describes a passive movement, your brain flags it automatically.
We have covered an immense amount of conceptual ground today. We started at the fluid dynamics of a single cell and scaled up to the macroevolutionary drivers that force millions of animals to migrate across continents. We've broken down the precise logical boundaries between moving and locomoting, and we have armored the listener against the specific traps examiners build into this text. It is time to lock all of this into place.
For anyone listening, this is the moment to focus entirely. We are going to establish your memory anchors. These are the 5 critical, non-negotiable facts drawn directly from the source text. If you remember nothing else from this deep dive, here is what you must remember. Fact 1, the baseline. Protoplasmic streaming in unicellular organisms like the amoeba is explicitly defined as the prime example of a simple form of movement.
Fact 2, the criteria. Locomotion is not just any movement. It has a strict 2-part definition. It must be a voluntary action, and it must result in a change of place or location. Walking, running, climbing, flying, and swimming are the specific examples provided.
Fact 3, the multi-tool principle. Biological structures multitask. Locomotory structures do not have to be distinct from movement structures. You must remember the specific textbook proofs. Paramecium uses cilia for sweeping food into the cytopharynx and for locomotion. Hydra uses tentacles for capturing prey and for locomotion. Humans use limbs for changing body postures and for locomotion.
Fact 4, the golden logical rule. Visualize the Venn diagram and memorize this exact relationship. All locomotions are movements, but all movements are not locomotions. Locomotion is the smaller circle inside the larger movement circle.
And fact 5, the biological drivers. The physical methods of locomotion are dictated by an animal's habitat, but the act of locomotion is driven by specific situational demands. Those 6 universal demands are the search for food, shelter, a mate, suitable breeding grounds, favorable climatic conditions, and escaping from enemies or predators.
Those anchors are perfectly synthesized. Let me give you the 60-second sticky summary to cement the entire philosophical concept in your mind. Ready? You are a living biological system. Because you are alive, your baseline state is motion. It is the constant low-level hum of existence. Your internal protoplasm streams, your heart muscle contracts, your diaphragm expands, your eyelids clear your vision, your jaw breaks down fuel. All of that is movement. Your engine is running. But you are not a sponge attached to a reef. You are not at the mercy of whatever drifts past you. When the situation demands it, when your internal sensors tell you that you are starving and need calories, when the temperature drops and you need shelter, when the biological clock dictates you must reproduce, or when a threat appears and you need to survive, you have the capacity to put the system into drive. You take those exact same biological tools, your limbs and your muscles, and you use them to voluntarily change your coordinates in the universe. That deliberate voluntary displacement for the sake of survival is locomotion.
It is a profound mechanism when you view it through that lens. Every step you take is the result of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. And as we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to push your understanding of these concepts a little further as you prepare to study the rest of this chapter. We spent a significant amount of time discussing the 6 demands that force an organism to expend the energy to locomote: food, shelter, mates, climate, predators. I want you to conduct a mental experiment. Imagine an organism that finds itself in a truly perfect environment, an environment where nutrient-dense food is passively delivered directly to it in endless supply. The climate is perfectly regulated and never shifts. There are absolute physical barriers preventing any predators from entering. The habitat provides zero situational demand.
A completely zero-pressure environment.
Precisely. If all the demands of the situation are permanently removed for thousands of generations, what happens to the biological imperative? Would the evolutionary drive for locomotion eventually degrade? Would that species slowly lose its complex anatomical levers and joints, reverting to a state of mere movement, simply sitting in place and processing the delivered nutrients? Think about the metabolic cost of maintaining a skeleton you no longer need to use. Keep that evolutionary pressure in mind as you move forward into the detailed mechanics of muscles and bones.
That is a brilliant concept to chew on. It forces you to realize that every bone and muscle we are about to study only exists because the environment demanded it. Well, that is all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us as we broke down the foundation of motion. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep reading defensively to avoid those exam traps, and keep exploring the deep logic behind your sources. We will see you next time.